future was not something waiting for us, but something already listening. For years, strange stories have circulated about secret experiments, hidden laboratories, and scientists trying to do the impossible. Not time travel, not teleportation, something even stranger: communication. The idea was simple, at least in theory. If time could bend, then maybe information could move through it. And if information could move through time, then perhaps the future could answer back. Most people would call that pure science fiction, but according to one disturbing story, a small group of researchers built a machine designed for exactly that purpose. They wanted to send a signal beyond the present and see if anything would respond. And one night, something did. Not with a prediction, not with a friendly reply, but with a warning. Tonight, we are diving into the mystery of the experiment where they may have tried to speak with the future, and why some believe the answer they received changed everything. To understand why this story feels so unsettling, we need to start with one fact. Science already proved that time is not as simple as it seems. Einstein showed that time is connected to space, motion, and gravity. It can move differently depending on speed and conditions. That discovery completely changed how we think about reality. And once that happened, a dangerous question appeared. If time is flexible, could information somehow pass through it? That question fascinated scientists, theorists, and of course, governments, especially during the Cold War, when both sides were willing to explore almost anything that might offer an advantage. This was an era filled with classified projects, strange research, and ideas that sounded completely impossible. Unusual frequencies, consciousness experiments, hidden technologies, psychological testing. Nothing seemed too bizarre to investigate. So when rumors began to spread about a project focused on communicating with the future, it did not sound entirely impossible. According to the legend, the experiment was run by a small team of physicists and engineers working in a secured facility. Their goal was not to move a person through time, but a signal, a message, something that could be transmitted forward and, if their theory was right, maybe receive a reply from a point that had not happened yet. The alleged setup was strange and highly controlled. At the center of the room was a transmission system connected to synchronized clocks, oscillating magnetic equipment, and a sealed chamber designed to reduce interference. Everything had to be precise. Timing, frequency, energy output, every variable mattered. The team believed that if they created the right electromagnetic conditions, they might be able to push encoded information outside the normal order of cause and effect. In other words, a message might be received before it should exist. The tests were simple in the beginning. They would transmit short sequences and attach clear questions. Can you receive this? What year is it? Respond on this frequency. Then they would wait. At first, there was nothing. No signal, no response, just silence. But eventually, that silence began to break. The first anomalies were easy to dismiss. Operators noticed small distortions in the equipment, brief returns, fragments of sound, pulses that did not match the original signal. At first, they blamed technical issues, interference, faulty wiring, outside transmissions, but the patterns continued, and then they became harder to explain. Some of the returns reportedly arrived too early, as if the system was reacting before the transmission had finished. Others appeared in broken sequences that looked almost intentional, like pieces of language trapped inside static. One story claims that during one test, a technician recorded a set of numbers appearing on the receiver seconds before the machine had completed sending its question. When the data was reviewed, part of the sequence matched the message they were in the middle of transmitting. That should have been impossible. So the team changed equipment, adjusted frequencies, and repeated the test under tighter conditions. But the strange returns kept happening. Then came the moment that transformed the entire project. One late-night session allegedly produced the clearest response yet. Not a pulse, not random static, a real message. And according to the story, it was not an answer. It was a warning. No official record of the exact wording has ever surfaced, which only made the story more disturbing over time. Some versions say the message was simple: do not continue. Others claim it said, you are not supposed to hear this. But the darkest version includes a line that changed the meaning of the entire experiment. We heard you first. That sentence is what made the legend so powerful, because if it were true, it would mean the researchers did not just reach the future. Something in the future was already aware of them, already listening. Witnesses in the story described the atmosphere in the room changing immediately after the message appeared. One operator allegedly felt intense pressure in his ears. Another said the air suddenly felt heavy. Several clocks in the chamber reportedly drifted out of sync at the same time. Then the system shut down instantly. When power returned, parts of the recorded data were missing. Some files were corrupted, and a few seconds of the session had simply vanished. But enough remained to convince the team that what they had heard was not ordinary interference. Something had responded. And after that, the experiment became far more serious. Instead of ending the project, the team reportedly doubled down. They redesigned the tests with a more careful approach. If the future could send back information, then maybe it could provide details that could later be verified. That was the key, because if tomorrow could reveal something that had not happened yet, and that event later came true, then the impossible would become measurable. So they began asking more controlled questions. They requested dates, locations, simple descriptions, anything that could eventually be checked against reality. The replies, however, were strange. They were often incomplete, fragmented, confusing. Single words, short phrases, times without context. One story says the machine produced a phrase that nobody understood at first. Blackwater, East Wall, 314. At the time, it meant nothing. But days later, according to the legend, a pipe rupture caused flooding near an eastern wall inside part of the facility, and the incident was discovered at 3:14 in the morning. Was that proof? Maybe. Or maybe it was coincidence mixed with fear and imagination. But for the people involved, it was enough to keep going. By then, they were no longer just running an experiment. They were waiting for the future to speak again. This is where the story turns darker, because the more contact they allegedly made, the more unstable things became. Some researchers reportedly began suffering from insomnia, headaches, nosebleeds, and anxiety. One technician claimed he started hearing fragments of conversations in his dreams before they happened in real life. Another said certain moments felt familiar in a way that terrified him, as if part of his mind had already lived them. At first, these symptoms were blamed on stress, long hours, pressure, lack of sleep, but some believed the problem was deeper than that. If the human mind is built to experience time in a normal sequence, what happens when that sequence begins to break? What happens when you hear pieces of tomorrow without context? A warning before the event, a sentence before the speaker says it, a memory of something that has not happened yet. According to one version of the story, a senior researcher eventually came to a horrifying conclusion. They were not hearing a single future. They were hearing fragments of multiple possibilities, and by listening, they might be interfering with which one became real. That idea created panic inside the team, because if the experiment was changing outcomes, then every message received might not be a neutral observation. It might be part of a loop, a future shaped by the act of trying to hear it. Like most forbidden experiment stories, this one builds toward one final session, the last attempt. The team allegedly decided to run a maximum output test in hopes of forcing a clearer response. This would be their strongest transmission yet. The chamber was sealed, the equipment was calibrated, the clocks were synchronized again, and this time they asked one direct question: what happens if we continue? The signal was sent. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the receiver exploded with sound. Not a clean reply, but a violent burst of layered audio, fragments of speech, distorted numbers, a low mechanical hum, and something that several people described as overlapping voices speaking at once. Then, through all that noise, one sentence became clear: "This is the point where you disappear." The lights went out, emergency systems activated, the doors to the chamber locked for several seconds. When the room was finally open, parts of the equipment had burned out. One recorder was destroyed internally, papers had been thrown across the room, and several data files were unreadable. And after that, depending on which version of the story you believe, the project was either shut down permanently, or one of the researchers vanished from all official records soon after. No public report, no explanation, just silence. So, did any of this actually happen? There is no confirmed proof that this exact experiment existed in the way the legend describes it. No complete file, no clear declassified document, no official source that fully verifies the story. And yet, it continues to survive. Why? Because it touches something deeply unsettling. We know time is stranger than it appears. We know governments have funded bizarre experiments in the past. And we know that human curiosity does not stop just because something feels dangerous. That is what keeps this story alive. Maybe it was a real project wrapped in exaggeration. Maybe it was only a rumor built from Cold War fear. Or maybe it was something worse, a successful experiment that was buried because the results were too disturbing to explain. Because if the future could answer us, would it comfort us? Or would it tell us to stop? Maybe the scariest part of this story is not the idea that someone tried to speak with the future. It is the possibility that the future responded, that somewhere ahead of us beyond the present moment, something heard the signal and chose to answer back. Not with help, not with clarity, but with a warning. And maybe that warning was never just for the people in that room. Maybe it was for anyone who would come later. Anyone curious enough to listen. Anyone convinced that time is only a road ahead and not something that might also be watching from the other side. So what do you think? Was this just another dark scientific legend? Or did a secret experiment really manage to make contact with tomorrow? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more mysteries, disturbing cases, and unexplained stories. And remember, some doors stay closed for a reason.